Good afternoon, everyone. I'll give you all a second to join and connect to audio. I know it always takes a little bit of time once you've joined. Already got the numbers going up, which is fantastic to see. All right, I think we're looking good. So hi, everyone. My name is Phoebe Schumacher, and I'm a senior consultant at Cred Consulting. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for joining our webinar this afternoon. So this is part of Cred's series of free Creducation webinars, where we join our colleagues and friends to talk about some of our knowledge and our ideas. So it's really exciting to have you all here. And some of you may have joined one of our Creducation webinars in the past as well. So today's webinar introduces our new 6 C's of engagement framework, which is really our framework for engaging communities. And we've developed this framework because we've noticed that community members and other stakeholders are being asked to participate more in engagement processes for a wide variety of purposes. But often there's really a lack of clarity on why we're engaging, who we're engaging with and who we need to engage with, and what it is that we actually want to understand, influence or impact through these processes. So in this framework, we've really taken a fresh look at engagement process to address some of these things. So this framework really takes its inspiration from, our years of engagement across the team, our experience, the experiences of the people that we're engaging with, so those lived experiences, and really bringing in those kind of appreciative inquiry, design thinking, and deliberative engagement principles as well. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all gathering on today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander participants with us today. And I'm joining from Gadigal land today in Surrey Hills in Sydney. So who are we? And it's really nice to see a lot of familiar names tuned in today. I'm just scrolling through the list now and it's lovely to see you all. But for those of you who don't know much about Cred, I do want to provide a little overview before we get stuck in. So Cred Consulting is a national multidisciplinary team where people first, social planning, research and engagement consultants. And our real purpose is around creating resilient, equitable and beautiful communities, places and cities. So our services include social research, engagement, which we'll be talking about today, strategy, communications and social value. And I'm really excited to be joined today by 3 of our amazing team members. So we've got our managing director and the founder of Cred, Sarah Riley, who I'm sure all of you know. We've got director Jen Geis and director Julia Miller-Randall, who will be our wonderful panel today. So Sarah, Jen and Julia are really 3 of Australia's leading engagement specialists. And in today's webinar, they'll be talking a little bit about what they've learned about engagement over their careers and really how we do things at Cred and of course our framework. So in the first part of the webinar, we'll be introducing you to the engagement framework and we'll share some examples of how we've used it successfully. And we'll have a lot of time for Q&A. So we'd really love to hear all your questions. And I encourage you throughout the webinar to submit them through the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar, which is down the bottom of your screen. And we'll have a section at the end where we'll get to all your questions and answer as many as we can. So to kick off today, I want to start with some introductions to our very wonderful panel. So Sarah, could you start us off with an introduction and tell us what you enjoy about engagement?
Thanks, Phoebe. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here today. I guess a wise young team member once said to me, I don't know what I don't know. And that's definitely what I've learned from over 20 years of talking with all sorts of communities and experts and stakeholders. That meaningful engagement has meant that I've been able to increase my knowledge of people, places and communities by having the opportunity to listen and learn from the voices of thousands of people that have given up their time to participate and talk with me. The insights that engagement brings around human and place experiences, values and sentiment is invaluable in creating empathetic, nuanced and deep decision-making around policies, products and designs. It really enables voices, including those most vulnerable voices, to really have a say and to participate in decision-making about things that are going to impact them. I think
Absolutely. That's all. Thanks, Sarah. And then Jen, over to you for an intro and why you love engagement.
Thanks, Phoebe. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on Bediagal country today down by the Cooks River. So I come from about 20 odd years working in sustainability, advocacy, policy and education, where often I noticed that people were reluctant to engage in the information or the issue because either they were bamboozled or they were afraid to look stupid because they didn't fully understand the material. So I realized after about 20 years in that discipline that most of my time was spent interpreting and communicating complex or sometimes scary information really simply and clearly. And so for 20 years in a sustainability role, I was really honing my skills in engagement. And so by doing that and allowing people to engage with complicated material, we allow them to have a say on really key moments or wicked problems in our times that really affect everybody. So what I love about engagement is bringing groups of people together who don't know each other, who've never met before sometimes, hearing from different voices and perspectives, meeting people outside their circles, and being able to fully engage with information that might ordinarily be boring or technical, but really important to help them make recommendations to solve some of those wicked problems. Thanks, Phoebes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. And then Julia, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I am greeting you all today from Meejin, from Turrbal and Yagera country in Brisbane. So I am Cred's Brisbane-based director, but I've spent the majority of my career in Melbourne. So I actually work quite closely with a lot of our Victorian clients as well. In terms of what I love about engagement, my background is as a strategic planner, and I am a self-confessed planning nerd. So for me, somewhat selfishly, engagement allows me to really entertain and explore one of my great passions, which is understanding our cities and our regions, and I guess the experience of people living in them. But I'm also extremely passionate about helping the community understand the role of planning in all of this. I'm also a massive people person. I love talking, I love listening, and I love connecting with people. So I feel it's really a great privilege that I get paid to work with different communities and stakeholders, to explore different issues, to ponder the future, and to think about some of the solutions of how we can make how we live and where we live even better.
Beautiful. And I think that's an excellent segue, Julia, into talking about what engagement actually is. So we'll start with this, and then we will be talking about what engagement is not. But to begin with, Julia, could you give us an overview of what engagement is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important from the outset to say that good engagement is about the journey. It's not a destination that we're working towards. Though we're leading to an outcome, it's definitely about that strategic process of working with communities of interest to understand needs and impacts, to design solutions and achieve long-term outcomes and relationships. Good engagement provides insights into values, priorities, and preferences as part of research or evidence building. Engagement, I think we often forget this, but it's so important. It's about creating empathy. It's about understanding diverse users and their lived experiences to better inform design and decision making. Nobody knows their place or their service better than those who use it. So I suppose related to this, engagement is also has a key role in fact checking or sometimes even truth testing as part of our processes. Engagement reduces risk by understanding the issues, the sticking points, the opportunities, and what's important to the communities of interest, those who are impacted by a decision. And I think in our rapidly changing world, engagement's absolutely critical to building trust between government and community, between decision makers and community, between proponents and community, and to really gaining that social license so that we can make the changes and evolve as we need to. And finally, I think the last thing I'd say about engagement is that engagement's about building capacity. No matter the activity, I think there's always opportunities for people to leave better informed than when they started, whether it's upskilling people about and making them aware about decisions that are being made in their local area, or someone leaving a workshop having made a new friend or made another industry connection. I think there's always that opportunity through engagement for us to be building capacity.
Definitely. Thanks, Julie. And it's always so special to see when those relationships start building and they come back, maybe a second time and they're so excited and they say hi and they're looking forward to seeing each other. It's beautiful. So going off the back of that, Sarah, I'm really keen to understand from your perspective what engagement is not, some of that myth busting.
Thanks, Phoebe. there are so many incredibly passionate and skilled engagement specialists out there in our industry, and people who really care about providing opportunities for communities and stakeholders to participate in decision-making processes. But I think what's also out there has become a little bit of a fear around engagement, because it's a little bit of a lack of clarity around why we're engaging. And sometimes engagement is used as a way to kind of push through decisions or to keep communities occupied while decisions are being made. And it might not always be as authentic and transparent as it needs to be. You know, we're often taught to be linear about the way we think, and sometimes engagement can be a little bit scary for people because, you know, we often hear people say things like, can't we just get people to agree with what we want to do? Or what if they don't agree with it? Well, that's not the point of engagement. As Julia said, it's a process, it's a journey. It's a journey of empathy, of insights and evaluation. Sometimes you'll end up with consensus, sometimes you won't. And I think some of the key points about what engagement shouldn't have to do is it shouldn't have to be the decision maker for you. It is one part of your decision-making process. But to consider that communities should be expert enough to be those decision makers, it's a lot of pressure on communities, to be honest. It won't always deliver consensus, and while we might move toward deliberative processes that seek some common understanding or common ground to move things forward from a community perspective, it's not always going to deliver consensus, and it shouldn't have to. The other thing I hear a lot, particularly from design teams, is I'm the expert. Why? What do communities know? Well, you are the expert. That's true. And in fact, I heard a quote from someone saying once, if I talk to the community and I'm trying to design a horse, I'm going to end up with a zebra. That one really cracked me up. Communities don't pretend to be experts, but what we can do when we engage well is to provide enough information about site constraints and opportunities, about design outcomes that allow communities to engage well. Communities can bring their lived experience and their user experience to your processes, and they're going to help you get much better design outcomes. So communities aren't replacing the role of the expert, but they can help experts understand people and places that they're designing for much better. And I think finally, the big one that we all hear about a lot, engagement isn't an issues management tool. That is what you might call PR or a good comms process, but it isn't really designed to manage an issue so you can get something approved. Good engagement will help manage risk, and it will help us understand what communities are feeling so we can make good decisions in the end, but it is not an issues management tool. And it's really important that we're clear with communities around what's negotiable and what's not negotiable before going out, because unfortunately, trust in government is at its lowest, community connectedness is declining, and when we go out and we engage in an inauthentic way, in an untransparent way, we're really breaking down those relationships that really good engagement can help us build. Thanks, Phoebe.
Definitely. Thanks, Sarah. And as we're going and as the panel are talking, please, I really encourage you to put questions in the chat, you know, asking for advice, anything like that. Sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A button. And we'll get to those at the end of the session and the panel can answer your questions. So I'm going to throw over to Jen now to take us through our 6 C's of engagement framework. So Jen's going to talk us through each of the stages and how we really refined the Cred way under that. So over to you, Jen.
Thanks, Phoebes, and thanks everyone for setting us up to present the 6 C's. We're really excited to present this to you all, and this is available on our website for you all to download. We're really thrilled and grateful that Cred's approach to engagement is well recognised and sought after, and we're driven by the fantastic feedback that we receive from both our clients and the communities we work with. And perhaps because we are people first planners and engagement consultants, we realized that we might approach community engagement a little differently. So we thought, why not try and articulate how we go about it? So we've reflected, and that's what we've done. We've reflected on our experiences over the years, see what works, and we've developed these 6 C's of engagement, and obviously we're big fans of alliteration as well. We realized that we've been intuitively following a cyclical framework to deliver our engagement processes, while also being informed by other methods of practice like what Sarah was talking about, so deliberation, appreciative inquiry, or design thinking as well. So kicking off with clarity, we always start with clarity. I see a few people today who've worked with us in the past. Hello, thank you for joining us. And you will know that we always ask why. Why are we engaging at this time? Why are we engaging with these people? And what do you need to know from this process? This really helps us to understand which stakeholders will be key to identify and to reach, and to identify some of the risks that might need to be managed. It's so surprising how often people can't articulate what they need from an engagement process. What's the purpose? And if you can't articulate what you need, then either you might want to question whether it's valuable and authentic to be engaging at that time, or what we often find is that community become confused about what they're being asked to do, and then frustrated, and then not likely to participate into the future. So defining purpose up front ensures that you design the most appropriate engagement down the track. So we often get briefs that are completely spelled out engagement program, exactly what we want you to achieve as an engagement program, without really clarifying who we're engaging with, the purpose for each stage of engagement, and what do we want from the community. So really asking those questions up front means we can design an engagement process that fits exactly what the needs are of the communities that we're trying to reach, but also to get the outcomes that we want to achieve. I think it's really important to note too that at this stage, at the clarity stage, as engagement professionals, we can really get a sense of whether the timeframes provided for the engagement are respectful, firstly, or even feasible. As we always see, there's real common practice of trying to squeeze the time given to engagement more and more, and that makes it really problematic for success. So following hot on the heels of of clarity is communication. This is where we clearly and accessibly articulate the purpose and the opportunities to engage. So here we would think about community languages, whether graphics could replace words, what type of collateral would be most fitting for the stakeholders you're trying to reach. So for example, if it's users of a park or a library, would in-place posters, ground decals, or flyers grab attention? If it's a large active community interested in a bit of a spicy issue, perhaps a webinar would be good to disseminate information directly and in a more personal way. So, and expert stakeholders might require a briefing to get facts really quickly. So that's how we start to use the clarity to then define the communication, and then moving on to the engagement program. Moving to collection. So now we start to get into the weeds. So under collection, we're gathering information, experiences, knowledge about place, a thing, sentiment and insights to inform an evidence base or to understand needs. So here we would use both quant and qual data collection methods, depending on what information was needed to inform the decision or a design, for example. We might use online surveys, or where representative data might be needed, telephone surveys, or a combo of both. We would do stakeholder interviews or meetings here, focus groups, in-place pop-ups, or sometimes participatory research drawing on that lived experience. The collection phase is usually informing the development of something, a strategy, a design, a decision, and the data will provide detailed research and evidence. And that usually feeds into the collaboration stage. So once we have our evidence base, we get to my favorite part of the process, which is collaboration. So this is when we bring people together to work collectively to define problems, co-create solutions, and dive deeper into the needs and preferences to inform our strategies, our designs, our decisions, whatever it might be. This is where in the design of our engagement, we can get really creative, and which is why it's the fun part for me, the bit that I love to think about. And we would draw on a variety of methods to run different types of workshops with communities of interest. We might go back out in place and host pop-ups. We might do co-design with communities of interest here as well. What we find is when engagement is really fun and dynamic and the information is presented sensitively, people are really delighted to be able to respond and participate and keep coming back. So in the collaboration phase, we would gather in-depth and nuanced data at this stage. Then we get to the confirmation stage. So that's about testing our findings, our facts, or our draft designs or draft strategies or whatever that might be. And for those in government, this is likely to be in a public exhibition. So during this phase, we might do things like focus groups, surveys or submission forms. We might go back out and do pop-ups or testing style workshops. And then finally, the final C is closing the loop, a really important stage. So reporting back to those who you've spoken with, those who have given up time to participate and provide you with their feedback or their recommendations, and how their feedback has been considered or not. Either way, it's really important to feed that back. It builds trust. It shows respect for people's insights and expertise and time. So in this stage, we might do webinars and then comms, things like e-news, social, web, and presentations. Thanks, Bees.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jen. I think that's an excellent way to kick off our case study. So you've touched on a few things there about kind of what we like to do and our preferred approaches. And now that we've really been introduced to the 6 Cs framework, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk through a real project example of how we've applied it successfully. So I'm starting with the Heart of Play master plan. So the Heart of Play was a uniquely, really place and socially led master plan project. And it successfully created a network of 7 really connected parks and sports spaces in the city of Parramatta. And I'm going to throw over to Sarah. And Sarah, can you tell us what was really successful about the engagement approach for this project?
Thanks, Phoebe. I've chosen a design-based project for the case study that I'd like to present because I think it is one of the areas where there's real challenges around engaging communities effectively and understanding the value of community participation throughout the process. Not just to de-risk something so you get it approved, but also to make much better design outcomes for everybody who's going to use a place. I think what was really successful was that the city of Parramatta took the approach to have a socially led master plan rather than being led by a design team. That meant that engagement was included at every stage of the master planning process, and it then resulted in a fully endorsed master plan exhibition and $8.7 million in West Invest funding. I think that what's really special about the area is, if anyone knows North Parramatta, it is a rapidly growing place right next to the Parramatta CBD. There is a significant undersupply public open space already, and the people that are using these 7 really important parks in the city of Parramatta are already loving and using these parks really well. But they had to think about the future 90,000 or so people who are also going to use those parks. There's a little demographic graphic there where we talk about all the different needs of all the different communities, and we really made sure that when we were looking at the clarity of the why we were engaging and the who we were engaging with and what those different interests of those groups would be, we did a really detailed demographic analysis. We spoke to local people about how they thought engagement would work best for different groups, and those groups that we had to think about at the beginning were people who loved their dog park, people who loved their sports grounds, other people who lived in high density housing, and I think in the future there'll be 70 to 80% of the people will be living in high density housing. All these groups have very, very different needs out of these 7 parks. So understanding who they were, how they might be interested in participating, and having real clarity about the why and the who was absolutely fundamental to the success of this project. I think the other thing that was really, really useful was that for us was to then think about how do we communicate to these diverse communities in a way that means something to them. So the way we might have introduced the project to the dog owners would be different to how we might have introduced it to the people who live right next to these parks. And with a culturally diverse community, this also meant thinking about translations and also just lots of really great visual ways to communicate with the group. And then we went through a multi-stage approach of engagement, starting with the collection. What happened, though, during this process, though, as you can see by this chalkboard on the screen, is that we got hit with COVID. And so while we had these really fantastic ideas around doing workshops, walking around the park, collecting information from people as we went, and all sorts of other things, we had to pivot and think, how do we collect this information? How do we get these insights in the most creative way, other than just a survey, in a way that these local people can to connect? And Jen and her husband, Steve, built and went and installed this big chalkboard in the middle of the park where we got the most incredible feedback from the community. Very lo-fi, but worked really, really well, and particularly worked well with the local children and the people who played social sports in the area. By doing these one-on-one interviews, group meetings, surveys, we did a scavenger hunt, self-led, for kids. They could walk around with a little map and tell us what they thought about the place. We were then really able to understand those really diverse and sometimes conflicting needs of the community around these 7 spaces. And that enabled the design team, who was Turf, who did the most incredible job, to come up with options and ideas to take back to the community that really responded to those diverse needs and challenges. There were no surprises for them. Sometimes designers go out with the plan and then communities get really angry at them and it's a big disaster. And so what's so great about making sure you understand those diverse needs and sometimes conflicting needs, quite often conflicting needs, means that there's no surprises when they do go out to the community the next time. So I think thinking about that rather than just going out with options, really doing that deep dive into the community and what they need and have interest in is really, really important. And then we went into a stage of collaboration, which was a really positive experience. Some challenges, Jen will remember, particularly from dog park owners. How do we come up with solutions around future-proofing a massive dog park so that in 10 years or 20 years' time, it might actually need to become a sports field? How do we future-proof that site? How do we get those communities on board? And we were able to have really great conversations, which kind of took the fear away from communities that they were going to lose something and that they started to understand and empathize with each other's needs. And so that meant that by the time it went out to exhibition for that confirmation, there were no problems. And we made sure that we really thanked everybody consistently throughout the process. We created a little newsletter that we distributed throughout the process. We gave people updates about what we'd heard at all points. And we made sure that everybody felt that they were heard and that we thanked them for their time. Thanks, Phoebe.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. So another project that we're keen to showcase today is the Frankston City Housing Strategy Engagement. And this is one that we've just recently delivered for Frankston City Council with our project partners, Co-Futures. So Frankston City Council is really committed and keen to develop a housing strategy that was really genuinely informed by residents and stakeholders' values and views. And Julia, I'm going to throw over to you to talk to us a little bit about how the engagement process was designed to really inform the housing strategy.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. And I think we might actually have some representatives from our project team from Council and Co-Futures here today. So thank you for being here and supporting us. So as Phoebe said, we've just wrapped our first phase of broad community and stakeholder engagement on this project, which is really focused on understanding the local values, issues and aspirations for housing in Frankston City, in the city of Frankston. As a project team, we acknowledged from the outset that this is a really sensitive but important time to be talking about housing. I don't need to tell any of you that we're in the midst of a housing crisis, but also down in Melbourne, the impacts of living through the COVID-19 pandemic are still very much front of mind. And I don't think there's ever been such a sharper focus brought on how we live, the way we live, and what we value about our houses. So that was really important context for us going into this project and thinking about how we undertook the engagement. So in talking about the Frankston City Housing Strategy engagement today, I just wanted to pull out a couple of the key C's that I think were really important to this process. And the first one I'll start off with is clarity. So there is a large multidisciplinary team working on this project with Council. So we do have town planning consultants tracked who are developing the housing strategy with Council, as well as, you know, some others. We worked really closely at the beginning of this process to understand what we wanted to know or test through the engagement process, and also the best way to gain those insights. I think that, you know, we were really reflecting on, you know, just because you can ask the question doesn't mean you always should, because it might not actually be relevant, or how you frame a question is just so important with particularly such a sensitive topic like this. But I'd also say that in thinking about the clarity piece, we were really keen to keep drawing our messaging and lines of questioning back to those aspects of the planning system that Council can actually influence, so that the engagement was authentic but also useful. And also through that process, we're educating the community about how we're planning, you know, how a housing strategy works, what it can and can't do, and really setting up those parameters early on. So it was really important for us from the outset to have that clear line of sight between how we framed the engagement, the questions that we asked, and then ultimately that feedback, getting that feedback that could be usefully integrated into the housing strategy as well. So that was our first C of clarity. The next C I wanted to talk about that was a bit special for this project was communication. we really used a wide variety of platforms to provide and channels to provide information and publicise this project with the community and stakeholders. We had really clear and consistent messaging across all of these different platforms, so that people really understood the challenge that we were addressing through this housing strategy, but also the outcome that we're working towards. So it was a really considered communications piece. One of my favourite bits of the piece was a short video that Co-Futures prepared with the project team, which is, a 1.5 minute video that really succinctly and neatly talked about the purpose of the housing strategy, the purpose of the engagement, and gave that call to action for people to get involved. And I think in a world where, we're in a TikTok era and we consume media and information in so many different ways, I think relying on people just to read a flyer or to go to a website isn't necessarily, realistic anymore. I think we need to be thinking about different channels and different ways to engage and inform our communities. And I think the video did a great job of that. In saying that, the video was complemented with a really snappy and graphically designed discussion paper, which is shown on this slide here. And people could also have access to the more comprehensive technical reports if they're so inclined to delve into the detail, which we know some people love to do. Even in our survey that we had, we included facts and figures about what's happening in Frankston City. So we're educating and communicating all along the way. So we had things like, did you know that we need 9,000 extra dwellings? And providing that as context, again, so that we're being really clear about the challenge, really clear about what we're trying to understand, and all leading that back to the housing strategy. So I think that, that little piece is all about that sort of capacity building, but also communicating in a variety of channels and environment and a variety of ways to really encourage that broad participation and broad engagement. I could actually talk about this project all day, but the last C I'm going to talk about is collection. So at the beginning of this engagement process, we heard from the Frankston City Council team that their community is really fatigued. And I don't think that's unique to just Frankston. I think that's happening right across Australia. So it was really important that we designed an engagement program that had different ways to get involved, depending on, I guess, your level of interest and your time. And that it was comprehensive, but also fun. So we had a range of activities. We had surveys, we had pop-ups, and I need to call out Frankston City Council, who delivered 11 pop-ups for us in our 8-week period, which they were absolutely out there talking to their community and taking leadership on this, which was so fantastic. We had an industry session with planners and developers and real estate agents. We had a community dinner and workshop. We had focus groups and one-on-one meetings. So we had a variety of different ways to collect that information. But one particular method that we used that I wanted to talk to everyone about was the youth workshop that we ran. And I think this is a really good example about how you tailor your activities to your audience. You tailor your collection to who you're talking to. So we had the privilege of spending an afternoon with representatives from Council's Youth Advisory Committee. And I think there's a picture here which shows our workshop in action, our focus group in action. And I hope you can see that people are smiling. We were having fun. It was a really great afternoon. One of the things that we did that was really successful was that we ran an activity called Hot or Not with this group. We gave each participant a paddle with hot or not for them to be able to switch around. And we showed them pictures of different types of housing, everything from traditional detached houses all the way through to higher density mixed use development. We showed them a broad range of housing types and designs. And the young people told us whether they thought they were hot or not. And then we had a discussion about that. And I think what was really great is that we got fantastic insights from this exercise. It gave us an understanding about the character of Frankston City, which is so important to a housing strategy. It gave us insights into what young people like and don't like about different housing or design. And I think in particular what, from a Frankston City context, what they felt like suited their neighborhood and what didn't, where they wanted to live or where they didn't feel like that was a place for them, which is a really important values piece. It gave us insights into their own housing aspirations and how that changes over their life cycle. So sometimes we'd show a dwelling, and they'd say, oh, I'd live here, while I'm at university, but I wouldn't have my family here. Or, that would make a great share house, all those sorts of things that really gave us insights about housing preferences or housing aspirations at different parts of the life cycle. But then importantly, we heard really loud and clear about what those issues are for housing for young people. We heard all about affordability being a key challenge and a key barrier and a key fear for them. We heard that sense of community is so important to this cohort, that they want to live somewhere where they're connected to their friends and their families, and housing design that really feels inclusive resonates with them. And we heard that accessibility, so being able to get to work, being able to get to the shops, being able to travel to bars and restaurants is super important to this cohort. I think, what was great about this process is that it was really fun. People didn't realize how rich their insights were that they were giving us. And that to me is a hallmark of a good collection process. You're having fun and providing all the insights and data, but you don't know just how rich it is while you're doing it, because you're just, you're in it, which was wonderful. So yeah, I'd say, I guess my parting piece in talking about this project is just that I've never seen so much engagement occurring in our industry as what we are now, which is fantastic, and I love it. But people are being pushed and pulled in so many different directions, and we're asking a lot of their time. So as engagement specialists, I just think it's so important that we're thinking creatively about how to engage with people, but most importantly, that they're having a great experience in being involved, that we gain the insights that we need, but we make them want to stay on the journey with us. And in a best case scenario, we make them want to participate again and again in different projects. And I think that's something that, good engagement can do. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julia. And so the last case study we have for you today is the Illawarra Shoalhaven Regional Adaptive Pathways Planning Pilot Project. It's a very large mouthful. So this is a project we're currently delivering for the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment. And this is really about informing a new approach to planning for homes, really in the context of future climate impacts and natural disasters. And this is a really interesting one because this is where we've run a deliberative engagement process over a series of sessions. And we are still a little bit in the thick of this one, but Jen, I'd like to throw it over to you to talk about really how we're using the 6 C's engagement approach in this project.
Thanks, Phoebes, and feel free to jump in because you are in the weeds in this project with me. So this project speaks to my intro around engaging on complex and possibly sensitive subject matter. And we held a deliberative process across 3 separate sessions with a demographically representative community group and also with a local First Nations collective concurrently. And concurrent to that going on, the large team of planners, scientists and experts were collecting facts, data. They were developing projections and scenarios behind the scenes, and the community recommendations were forming part of their evidence base as we went. So in a true deliberation, we were building on each session as we went, but we were also informing the government thinking after each session. So it was a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, trying to catch the tail. Like Julia, I'm going to speak to 3 of the C's for this project, and we are still working on this project, so it's not complete yet. So I'm not going to speak to closing the loop because we're not there yet. But clarity is the first one. So we had to interpret highly technical and pretty sensitive information so that the community could meaningfully engage with this project to understand their tolerance for change, but also their tolerance for impact, for climate change impact, so that they could agree on recommendations for the decision makers. And as you can imagine, some of that information was coming from scientists and planners as well. And so when it landed with us as the engagement lead for this project, we had to really seek clarity from our client about what the purpose of each session was. What do you need from the community? And really, what does the community need to know to be able to engage with this and to respond in a way that our client was getting the data that they required? And do the community, really importantly with this project, do the community need to know everything? Because there was a lot. And so that we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort on that throughout the 3-stage deliberation. So ahead of each session, we would have very lengthy conversations around really honing the purpose, really honing what information we had to work with, and really trying to understand what the community actually needed to help engage with that information. So then that leads really clearly into communication as my next C. So clear and plain English messaging was used throughout the process because of the nature of the technical content. We had such a diverse group in the room. I think we had 25 odd people in the room, some from social housing, all the way across the Illawarra Shoalhaven. We had younger people, we had older people, we had people who were really adept with their phones and with technology, and some people who weren't. We had people who were homeowners and renters, families, a whole range of people. So we could not assume that everyone in that room would be able to understand technical content. And so we had to really hone that down and draw on our skills as knowledge brokers to clarify the information that the government collective, as they were working with this, were using to make their decisions. And we had to be very strong about that, about what we would and would not present to the community. So I think there was a really good lesson in this project when the pressure was on and the timeframes got constrained towards the end of the community engagement, and there was less time available to consider the information coming out of the government and back into the community process. That's when we started seeing frustration and some skepticism from some community members in the deliberation. So the last C, and it's my favorite C, is collaboration. So this was a deliberative process with the Discrete Citizens Panel and a First Nations collective. And although elements of the sessions had collection in them, ultimately the whole process was collaborative. Because we were presenting future possibilities around climate impacts and understanding the community, understanding that this community has already been impacted by disasters, we were really conscious to ensure the sessions were both empathetic and fun. We knew that people wouldn't show up week after week unless the time was taken to really consider their experience. And so like Julia, we, in her previous example, we focused a lot on making sure these 3 sessions were engaging, they were fun, they were creative, and we got people to meet each other, move around, and have quiet time to reflect and relax as well. So we used gamification, interactive activities, and novelty and fun elements, including party poppers, which was really fun, to unite participants. We created a really nice vibe, and we guided them into responding to the government material. So they collectively developed values, vision. They identified vulnerable community members. They responded meaningfully to future climate change and planning scenarios. And they shared their own lived experiences of disasters, which is really important to understand when we're planning for new homes. And ultimately, they've made incredibly useful recommendations about future housing and infrastructure in the region. And I'll just point to the photos on the screen to describe some of them for you, because you can see the joy in the room. We had a really great time talking about this stuff that's actually pretty scary and a little bit intense to think about. So we celebrated 2060 with party hats. We worked collectively around a game that Cred developed. You can see in that top left photo and the middle photo. And then on the right, one of our traditional owners at our First Nations collective holding up one of the core values that collective recommended to government moving forward. So the C's in this project have been so useful in us really working through quite complex and complicated information so that the community was a really useful evidence input into the government's deliberations. Thanks, Phoebes.
Thank you, Jen. That was fantastic. So now we are in our Q&A section of the session. So I really encourage you all to put any burning questions into the Q&A button, any you've been thinking about as our panel have been speaking today. But I'll start with our first one, and this is a great question. So I'll pass this one over to you, Sarah. So do you ever find it necessary to change the order of the Cs around? For example, bringing in collaboration before communication, so you're working with someone in the community to find the right way to communicate.
Absolutely, Phoebe, but I would call that part of the clarifying of the process. So particularly when working with First Nations communities, young people, culturally diverse communities, bringing in those people to help us collaborate with us on how to engage in the best possible ways, the right questioning to ask, and also how to connect with leaders in those communities, or working alongside those community leaders as well, to go out before we communicate and collect and etc. So absolutely, it is a really common thing that we would do, but we would think that is all part of that why and how to develop that plan that is going to be the most successful. So yes, definitely, Jason, it's a really, really good question. Jen or Julia, do you want to add anything more to that?
I think it's a cyclical process that we've articulated, Jason. So it could go directly around, but also it could go the other way as well. And the Cs can be interchangeable. And like you say, we often co-design engagement processes right from the beginning. So I think it's really fair to say the Cs can be mixed up. Having said that, we always start with clarity. Always, always, always. Yep.
Anything to add on that one, Julia, before we move on to our next question?
I think they've done a great job of answering that question.
Fantastic. Well, our next one is a long one, so I'll read it out and then we'll go from there. So it's great and important to have the clarity step done really well, but when you've got a rigorous process that, you know, has wisdom from other stakeholders that might be out of scope, but could be valuable for future work, or, you know, identifying new policy positions, have you worked on documenting those elements of the engagement process? So I'll throw that one out to the room, whoever is feeling very inspired to answer that one.
I can have a first crack if that helps, and then others can jump in. It's a great question, Mike, and you know, the amount of times that we've had conversations where sometimes, you know, they might go a little bit to a place you never thought it was going to go to, and you know, you need to continue having, you know, capturing that feedback. What I would say is that I think it's really important that through any engagement process, the engagement outcomes are only really as good as that engagement summary that you provide at the end, and you need to really be providing that very clear and authentic record of what you've heard through your process. So while it might uncover things that aren't necessarily directly part of your process, they should still be documented. They might not form the headline of your engagement report, but it's absolutely something that we'll always feed back to our clients, so that they can take that on board, direct that where it needs to go. But I think, you know, it's about authentically capturing the conversations that you have and the outcomes of the collection process that you run. I don't know if Jen or Sarah, you want to add anything to that?
No, just to say that, yes, absolutely agree with you, Julia. And I think the more as an industry we can get better at sharing insights that we learn through these processes as well, because, you know, we've got ChatGPT, we've got plans and policies, but they really do not keep up with the observations that engagement professionals and engagement specialists have every single day. The world is changing so fast, the way people feel about things, the way they see and perceive things changing so constantly. And those observations are really the absolute richness that we need to be sharing with each other to ensure that we're all doing the best possible thing for our future generations.
And I would say that in engagement reporting, it's absolutely crucial to be reporting on those side elements, because it gives the client, whether that's a government agency or a private client, so many insights that are useful, not just for that project, but for other decision making down the track. So that's something that we would never just cut out of our engagement reporting. It's always included in there, because we don't work in a vacuum when it comes to one subject matter. There's a whole range of things that influence that.
Definitely. Thank you all. So another great question here, and I love the alliteration of this one. So how do you find that the other 6Cs, so consultants and clients, love it, engage in this process, and how do you make them more active participants rather than spectators?
What a good question, Marco. Jen, do you want to kickstart that one? Or...
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Marco. So I think it's fair to say that we're pretty successful at doing that, Marco, and ensuring that other consultants and our clients come along the journey with engagement with us. We're very clear about our process right from the beginning. We're very clear about what we think engagement is and what it isn't for Cred. And so even before we would bid on a project, we are very clear about what it is that we will do and the sorts of projects that we wouldn't do. So if we go down the path of working with a client or consultants on a team, it's really that clarity piece right from the beginning around what engagement is for us is always, we wear it on our sleeve. And so I think that means if you work with us, you're coming along the journey. You can see the value in doing the 6Cs framework process in getting valuable outcomes for yourself if you're the client, but also ensuring that your community the capacity is being built in that community, connections are being made in that community, and we're a values-based organisation, so we're only going to be doing it for the right reasons.
And Jen, I'd just add to that, I think particularly from consultants, the reality is that consultants are planning and delivering most of our cities. And so I think that there is a little shift happening, and I hope that us all as members of the industry can continue this shift to understand that the lived experience, the user experience of the people that we're planning and designing for is just fundamental to better design outcomes. So how do we make that happen? Well, like Jen said, we constantly advocate for it. We really are able to articulate the benefits of doing a process this way to both themselves and the decision makers, and getting things done faster, really, and more seamlessly. But I think ultimately it's about a shift and a bit of a change in our value system about really understanding what engagement is and why it's so important in better outcomes for communities.
The only thing I was just going to quickly add to that was that when it comes to, I guess, clients being active participants in this process, I mean, it definitely does change from place to place, but something that I've observed is that I think we're seeing our clients stand shoulder to shoulder with us a lot more as we're delivering engagement processes these days. And I think that's doing a lot of great things. It's building that capacity within the organisation. It's building those relationships between community and stakeholders and the client. And I think also it's so important that that our clients are hearing what we hear and understanding that issue firsthand, or hearing those different perspectives, because as much as we try and convey that in an engagement summary report, which I think we are very balanced in how we report things, there's nothing quite like having to discuss that with someone who might be a little bit emotional, or hearing the love that someone might have for a place. So I think things are changing. I think it's quite rare these days that I'll go out and deliver engagement without someone from my client side with me. I think they want to be there. Can't always be the case, but I think that there is that desire and that recognition that to build trust, to build authentic relationships, you have to be there too. You can't just hand it over to consultants anymore.
Yeah, it's true, Julia, and that care is a really fundamental part of what we're doing. And like you said before, also respecting that people are giving up their time to participate in the process. So yeah,
I think too, we create fun processes and creative processes, so people enjoy watching it. It's a little different to what they've experienced in the past. And so if we've worked with clients who've been burned by terrible engagement, or a really awful experience where community might be really upset or that sort of thing, and so they're a little gun shy to be at front and center at engagement. But in our experiences, that usually changes when you spend some time building trust and developing processes that are really thoughtful and considered of who you're speaking with and the content you're delivering.
Absolutely. And I think it's really about setting our clients up for success. I mean, we're in the project for that short period of time, so when we leave, they've got that relationship that they can carry through and really continue that process with the community. So fantastic. So I'll move on to our next question, and this is a great one from Mantej. Hi, Mantej. So Mantesh says that organizations are constantly changing, and obviously with that, so are the leaders and their priorities. And this can be really challenging for communities who, you know, have all these changing directions and priorities, and there's a bit of confusion there. So Mantesh asks, how do you guide both organizations, leaders, and then of course communities through that dynamic and really ensure that trust and honesty and engagement? Who wants to kick us off with that one?
I'm happy to. Yeah. But I just come straight back. I'm going to be really boring, Mantesh. I'm so sorry. I come back to clarity. It really comes back to that clarity piece. So it's all about communication. Things change all the time in government, as you well know. And you know, there might be multiple times that a single community is being engaged in any given year about different priorities that might read the same to that community member, because communities don't necessarily think the way we do about city making. And so that communication and clarity piece is so key. So people really understand what it is that they're asking, what you're asking of them, and what they're working towards right at that point. In terms of the other end of the spectrum, dealing with changes in government and who might be clients of that sort of thing, I'm not sure I have an answer for that from our perspective, but I would urge you to look at clarity right from the beginning.
Fantastic. Would Sarah, would you like to add something to that one as well?
No, I think that was a good answer.
All covered. All right, fantastic. So I think one we'll finish off with before we wrap up today is a question that we get asked a lot, and it's really about the, you know, only ever hearing from the loudest voices in the room and how we can really make sure we're engaging with more people in the community. So I'd love for our panelists to just, as you know, finish off today by answering this one for us, and then we'll wrap up. You go, Sarah.
Me? I think Julia's ready to go.
Oh, go, Julia.
I am. I'm ready. I'm ready. I would say go to where the people go. I think that don't expect everyone. No one wants to come to a town hall meeting anymore. But you know, on this Frankston strategy, the Frankston City Housing Strategy, we had an extraordinary number of young people that participated in this process, and that is absolutely because council went to where young people go. They hung out at skate parks, they were at the shopping centres, and lo and behold, we had really good participation from young people. So I would say go to where the people are and make it fun. Yeah.
Reward people for their time. Yeah. So we are big believers in rewarding people for their time, and a lot of councils in particular struggle with that. I think it's not something that's been done a lot in the past other than for deliberative processes, but post-COVID, I think the landscape has really changed. And so we find in order to get really fabulous participation, really dedicated participation, really broad range of people participating, offering some sort of reward for time. That doesn't necessarily mean dollars and cents. It could be other types of rewards. People respond to all sorts of incentives, but that's a really key thing that I think is a lesson from COVID.
Yeah, Jan, and just to add to that, we've got about 2 minutes left. I think that's really important too when council laws, in particular, when you go and present to them at a council briefing, they always question representation. And so, go to where people are, do as much broad engagement as possible, but also if you really do want the representative engagement, then you can do recruited engagement and reward people for their time as well.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. So that brings us to the end of today's session. So I want to say a big thank you to our wonderful panel for sharing all your insights and advice. And thank you to everyone who's dialed in today as well and submitted questions. It's been a really great, really fruitful session, and we hope you found it really useful as well. So we do have a short feedback survey that will just pop up when we end the webinar. And I really encourage you to do that, as it really helps us to plan our future Creducation webinars based on your feedback. And if you haven't already, as Jen mentioned earlier in the session, we really encourage you to download our 6 C's of engagement framework, which my colleague Ari has just popped in the chat now. So you can do that on our website, have a read, and please feel free to contact us if you've got any questions or want to get any clarity around any of that. That's the first C. And today's webinar has been recorded, so we will send the recording around to all of you. And if you'd like to refer back to it or share it with someone who missed the session, you're more than welcome. And if you do have any questions or would like to chat further, please get in touch. We've got our details up on the screen. We'd really love to chat with you. But stay tuned for our next Creducation webinar, and thank you so much for coming, and have a lovely rest of the day. See you later.
Thanks everybody. Bye.